Welcome, everybody, to Close News. We have a very special guest, Dr. Jim Fetzer. It is February 26th, 2025. We got a very interesting show this time around. Let's see what we got going on. Jim, how are you? What are the updates?
Oh, great. We got several interesting developments, some of which are troubling. We know, of course, that the FBI had recently discovered 2,400 additional records on JFK that hadn't previously been reported. This is very odd. It's over 60 years since his assassination in 1963. So how can it be the case that they're coming up with records? Meanwhile, Pam Bondi and Donald Trump were very emphatic about releasing the Epstein files, the JFK files, I think also RFK and MLK. What's happened? Turns out now that Pam Bondi has gone dark, refusing to release the Epstein, JFK, or RFK files. This author speculates that it's because they implicate Israel. Here we have her.
And Israel is one of our, if not our greatest ally in the world. And I'm so proud of what happened today. I've been to Israel twice as Attorney General, and Jerusalem is the capital of Israel.
All right, but as you know, with all these Palestinian protests, the fear seemed to be that it might be agitating a lot of this violence. Now, one of the concerns is that the Palestinians, of course, look forward to a homeland of their own, whether it ever comes to pass. But key to that would be making East Jerusalem its capital. That does not seem likely now, but what's your sense?
Well, you know, the U.S., we're in the final stages of finalizing our peace plan with Israel and with Palestine. Jared Kushner has been leading that up. He is an amazing person. He's brilliant. He's soft-spoken. He's a great negotiator, as well as the President of the United States. And I feel that I think this shows strength. It says that we mean what we say. President Trump has always said Jerusalem is the capital, and it is now firmly the capital.
But we mean what we say, but we're not releasing the Epstein, JFK, or RFK files. Now, I'll tell you, Israel had a role in JFK and in RFK. Actually, I think a more substantial role in the latter than in the former, because based upon my research, which is quite extensive, I have 4 collections of expert reports, research on the assassination. Turns out that the best way to understand it is to draw a distinction between the sponsors, the individuals and groups who wanted JFK out, primarily for reasons of policy, where they preferred Lyndon to JFK, with the exception of the anti-Castro Cubans who simply wanted to retaliate because they felt they'd been betrayed at the Bay of Pigs by not providing U.S. air support. Whereas Jack had made it clear from the beginning there must be no overt U.S. government involvement. But where it turns out there are 8 different sponsors, including the CIA, the Joint Chiefs, the Mafia, the anti-Castro Cubans, the Texas oilmen, Israel, the Eastern establishment surrounding the Fed, and LBJ, who actually was the initiator of the entire plot so he could assume the presidency and would be in a position, by the way, to guarantee that no one who participated in the assassination of his predecessor would ever be punished. And each of those 8 sponsors put up their own shooter. I mean, it was when I started to identify who the actual shooters were. The first shot was suffered by Jack. He was hit in the back. Shallow shot, only went in about as far as the second knuckle on your little finger. Well, that was fired by a deputy sheriff on the top of the county records building, who was a Texas oilman shooter. And then he was hit in the throat by a shot that passed through the windshield, fired from inside the triple underpass. That was by an Air Force expert. That was a Joint Chief shooter. After the driver, William Greer, pulled the limousine to the left and do a halt to make sure he'd be killed, since they weren't confident he was already dead, though he may have been, because a world authority on the human brain, Bob Livingston, explained to me his belief that the bullet passed through the windshield and hit his throat had splintered, that part had gone down into the right lung and the other upward through his brain to rupture this tough membrane called the tentorium that covers the cerebellum, a compact part of the brain at the base, which I believe had the effect of, at the minimum, paralyzing him, because we see no affect from JFK thereafter. He was cinched up in his corset, a back brace, because he was in pain from a wound he'd incurred in World War II, PT 109, saving a fellow sailor. And when I started to piece together who were the actual shooters, it immediately struck me that each of the sponsors had put up their own shooter. So that Jack is then, after the limousine is brought to a halt, he's hit in the back of the head, slumps forward. That shot was fired by the anti-Castro Cuban in the Daltex. Then we had the shot after Jack eases him back up, look at him right in the back, in the right temple. That's from the Mafia shooter at the intersection of the triple underpass and a bypass, and near simultaneous hit the side of the head by a shot fired from inside the curbside sewer opening, I believe by the Israeli shooter. So there you got 5 wounds in JFK, each of which came from a different direction and therefore implied a different shooter. You got John Connolly shot in the back. That's a 6th shooter, and that appears to have been Lyndon Johnson, personal hitman, firing from the Daltex. Then we had another, a police officer, a CIA guy, who joined the Dallas police with a handgun. The easiest shot, but it would have injured Jackie, so he had to pull his shot, and the bullet wound up in the grass. Well, that's a 7th shooter. And then we've identified yet another, the only one for whom I do not know the rank, the name, rank, and the serial number, who is behind a tree, a lone tree in the grass opposite the grassy knoll. You wouldn't think there'd be room for a shooter to conceal himself. But I've seen photographs from 2 different experts of him standing up holding his rifle. Now, that had to be, by process of elimination, the shooter for the Eastern establishment surrounding the Fed. What's absolutely fascinating, this tied them together in like a blood oath, so none of them could reveal without running the risk of revealing them all. The CIA shooter was a particularly nasty piece of work. His name was Roscoe White. He actually served as a body double for framing Oswald by means of backyard photographs. Larry Bravura has done completely brilliant work on the limousine stop and all that transpired in his book, The JFK Horseman, available at moonrockbooks.com, as well as confirming what the Warren Commission knew from the beginning, at least the staff, that Lee Oswald had been captured in a famous photograph, peering out of the doorway of the book depository, watching what was going on, which means that he not only cannot have been the lone gunman, but cannot have been one of the multiple, actually altogether 8 shooters. In fact, Harold Weisberg, who published a series of books about the assassination called Whitewash, in the 2nd volume, published already in 1966. In the last 4 pages, he's talking about the difficulty that the Warren Commission staff is having concealing that Lee Oswald was in the doorway during the shooting and therefore cannot have been the lone assassin, but was exactly what he declared himself to be, the patsy. Now, what I'm saying is, yes, if you got all the JFK records, it would confirm this scenario I'm describing here, but Israel, while involved, was only one of 8 shooters. And indeed, the whole event was facilitated by Lyndon of the assassination by J. Edgar of the cover-up, where they appear to have had as their project manager, as it were, to coordinate all these events, Alan Dulles, whom JFK had retired from the CIA with great fanfare after having Bobby and Maxwell Taylor investigate the Bay of Pigs fiasco, discovering that the agency had learned the Soviets knew the date of the invasion, which they'd shared with Castro. So Castro knew we were coming. The Soviets knew we were coming. The CIA knew they knew we were coming. Everyone knew except the commander-in-chief, who I have no doubt would have called it off. But in the wake of those revelations, he removed 2 icons of the intelligence community, Richard Bissell, who was a special for plans, and Charles Cabot, lieutenant general, who happened to be the brother of Earl, who was the mayor of Dallas at the time of the assassination. You see how tightly all this is woven together. Well, by refusing to release the JFK files, or the RFK, and by the way, RFK was betrayed by one of his own most trusted members. I believe it was Tom Mikovits, who had him leave by way of the pantry when he was originally going to leave by way of the grand ballroom, which of course was the scene of the assassination. Sirhan, like Lee Oswald, was a patsy. He'd been hypnotized. We got a psychiatrist who was boasting about having hypnotized Sirhan for the CIA. Very unwise thing to do, but he revealed it during a radio interview. For Sirhan, I believe, was triggered off by the girl in the polka dot dress and fired multiple shots toward Bobby, but did not hit Bobby, and he was in front of Bobby. Meanwhile, the security guard staying beside him, Thane Eugene Caesar, shot him behind the right ear from 1.5 inches, and as Bobby fell, he kept firing, hitting his body 2 more times, and another round going through his jacket, where Bobby grabbed at his tie, and the tie clasp for the security guard can be seen in some of the photographs as Bobby lies dying on the ground. Now, one of the tells, this was primarily an Israeli op, as indeed was 9/11, is a patsy. Sirhan was a Palestinian. The Israelis go out of their way to blame the Palestinians, thus on 9/11, which was indeed an Israeli op. It originated in the fertile imagination of Bibi Netanyahu and Ehud Olmert, both of whom served as prime ministers of Israel about the time of the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. They want to figure out an event that could be used to justify the United States becoming militarily involved in the Middle East, to take out the modern Arab states that served as a counterbalance to Israel's domination of the entire region, and eventually to confront the Persian nation of Iran. And they undertook 9/11 in complicity with the CIA and the neocons in the Department of Defense, where Rupert Murdoch published a brilliant book called Crossing the Rubicon, where, based upon publicly available sources, he established that Vice President Dick Cheney had been the executive director of events on the ground that day from a bunker beneath the White House. Now, let me hasten to add, it was a much more elaborate plot than we've led to believe. It wasn't just destroying the Twin Towers at stake. They're going to blow up the Holland Tunnel, the Lincoln Tunnel, the Brooklyn Bridge, isolate Manhattan as an island. There were 200 Israeli Mossad agents who'd been entered into the United States by the CIA as art students. some of whom were known as a gelatin group, were actually occupying the Twin Towers where they had like free run. And I believe they were involved in positioning explosives that were used to create those cookie cutter like cutouts in the sides of the building that was supposed to simulate hits by aircraft. Where I believe the original plan was to use remotely controlled drones. It turns out Dov Zakheim, who was a controller of the Pentagon at the time, and remember the day before 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld announced 2.3 trillion was missing, and they were going to try to track it down. He had the section chief bring all the documents and records related to the missing money into the West Wing, which had been newly renovated and made roughly nuclear proof. It was the only wing of the Pentagon that had been renovated. So it was largely bereft of personnel and property, except for the section chief and the budget experts, accountants, financial analysts. So when I looked at the casualty list for the Pentagon, which had 120 names, I was astonished. There were as many as 36 names of budget experts and analysts who'd been in the West Wing and were killed when it was hit not by a plane, but by a missile directed there to take it out. So that it turns out that two of the 9/11 planes weren't even in the air that day, Flight 11, North Tower, and 77, the Pentagon. And the other two, 93, Shanksville, and 175, South Tower, were still in the air after. In fact, pilots for 9/11 Truth, who've done brilliant work on this, tracked Flight 93 and found it was over Champaign-Urbana after it officially crashed in Shanksville, and that Flight 175 was over Harrisburg and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, after it officially hit the South Tower, and where I obtained FAA registration records that showed that the physical aircraft used for those flights, and remember, the same plane can be used one day, Tampa to Chicago, the next day, New York to San Francisco, were not even deregistered, formally taken out of service until 28 September 2005. So how can planes that weren't even in the air crashed on 9/11, and how can planes that crashed on 9/11 have still been in the air 4 years later? But that too was an Israeli op. I think Van Bondi, who we just heard being a zealous Zionist, has found herself compromised. As we have Henry Macau talking too about how Trump can't keep his JFK and Epstein promises. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi refuses to release the Epstein, JFK, and 9/11 files because they all implicate Israel, especially, 9/11, but Epstein, he was the Mossad agent. Trump can't keep his promises because Israel and the CIA are behind the JFK assassination and the Epstein operation. Trump is blackmailed by Mossad. A whistleblower alleges the FBI is deleting evidence to obstruct Patel and Bongino's investigation. And of course, Don Bongino has just been made deputy director of the FBI after Kash Patel's confirmation. Legal experts warn that if evidence destruction is proven, those responsible could face serious legal consequences, including obstruction of justice charges. Meanwhile, the FBI is yet to respond to these allegations as the situation unfolds. All eyes are on Patel and Bongino to see how they'll respond. Will the agents take action against those allegedly involved in the cover-up, or will this controversy deepen the FBI's ongoing credibility crisis? Thus, Reddit conspiracy comment. Is it not weird that the Epstein files still haven't been released and now there are rumors of evidence being destroyed? Trump promised the release of these files, amongst other information, and is coming up short. Funny part, is all of the so-called truth tellers from Rogan to PBD podcast won't say a thing about it. That's how you know who are truly sheep. They only believe in holding certain people to a standard. This 100% suggests Trump's name is in the docs. I bet something will be released later after evidence has been tampered with and destroyed. Some might say the Biden admin destroyed evidence. I would say that shouldn't stop Trump or his lackey Cash from releasing straight pedophiles. Now, part of the reason I mention all this about 9/11 is that Kevin Barrett recently interviewed Ryan Dawson on 9/11 and talked about no planes theory, the no planes theory being the conjunction of four theses, that Flight 11 didn't hit the North Tower, that Flight 77 didn't hit the Pentagon, that Flight 93 didn't crash in Shanksville, that Flight 175 didn't hit the South Tower. All of which is provable, all of which I have proven with the help of brilliant work done by a fellow named Richard D. Hall out of the UK, who sorted out the evidence in New York City, where Judy Wood and Morgan Reynolds had spent a year and a half to convince me, as a founder of Scholars for 9/11 Truth, to take a look at the plane evidence. I found it so far-fetched when we had these videos, quite a few, of the planes in New York, to think that there was something wrong with all of those videos. But Richard D. Hall explains how it was done using a holographic projector, an airborne holographic projector. I mean, what you have is Flight 175, for example, approaching the building at an impossible speed. At the speed it was traveling, a Boeing 767 would have physically come apart in the air. Pilots document this in their video, 9/11 intercepted, that the plane would have physically come apart in the air. Then it makes an impossible entry into the building. There's no deceleration. If you count the number of frames it takes for the plane to pass its entire length into the building and to pass its entire length through air, they are the same, which is absurd unless a massive 500,000 ton steel and concrete building provides no more resistance to the trajectory of an aircraft in flight than air. Well, here's Kevin interviewing Ryan Dawson. I had an exchange with him on the air years and years ago after a 9/11 event in New York. And he says he agrees with him about the planes, that here he says, well, you get your take on that. We both agree that the no planes hypothesis about New York is very, very, very likely wrong. Ryan Dawson. About all of it. There are definitely airplanes. I mean, the Pentagon's just as stupid because you got a big airplane-sized hole with airplane parts in it. The DNA from all passengers who are on the plane hitting the building, they're like, I don't see it on film, so it didn't exist. I mean, this is just ridiculous. There are no plane parts at the hit point at the Pentagon. It's about 10 feet high, 16 feet wide. You got unbroken windows. You got a chain link fence. You got 2 automobiles on fire, 2 pools of cable. But what you don't have is a massive pile of aluminum debris from a 100-ton airliner, a 757. No bodies, no seats, no luggage, no wings, no tail. Not even the engines were recovered, and the engines are virtually indestructible. Even Jamie McIntyre was the first, the best reporter on the scene when being interviewed in front of the Pentagon, was asked, about the plane having hit the building. He said, well, from my close-up inspection, There are no signs of any plane having hit anywhere near the Pentagon. All there are these little fine parts you could pick up in your hand, and he got him right because it was hit by a global hawk. It was hit by a missile, an unmanned aerial vehicle firing a missile, and the hawk was made out of synthetic fibrous material. So what he was picking up were parts of the hawk. Well, this is very disappointing to me with Kevin Barrett and Ryan Dawson. I'm not surprised about Dawson, but that Kevin at this late stage should hold such a ridiculous view in the absence of massive evidence. And here, let me just say, you can find the Richard D. Hall radar study. Here it is online. I give the links. I mean, it's so good what he does. So many ways he analyzes it, showing how the plane approached, how it was faked, how they used what turns out to have been an airborne holographic projector. In fact, I've got a page from an Australian military manual showing an airborne holographic projector. So everyone ought to look at my 9/11 special from 2021. You can go to my BitChute channel, Jim Fetzer. I'll add it in. Meanwhile, of course, we've had some very positive development regarding Ukraine. It looks to me like Russia and the U.S. are going to resolve it. Zelensky, Trump is going to somehow get $500 billion in mineral resources one way or the other. Zelensky initially rejected the idea. Putin, who controls 20% of Ukraine, offered to provide it. And as I understand it, Trump was going to, in reciprocation, release unfree $300 billion in frozen Russian assets. I think we have good reason to believe the Ukraine war is going to be settled in short order, I'd say before Easter, without any doubt. Now, what's going on in Gaza is a whole nother matter. Remember, Trump offered this fantastic story of U.S. taking control of Gaza and turning it into the Riviera of the Mediterranean. Just unbelievably lunatic, in my opinion. But it required the ethnic cleansing, moving all the Palestinians out of Palestine. That's in violation of international law, the UN Charter. And all the Arab states have rejected it. There's nowhere for them to go. Even the proposal was made they should be sent to Indonesia. Well, the Palestinians are attached to the land. Jerusalem. I mean, they have the birthright, not modern day Israelis who turn out to be genetically Khazarians, where Khazaria is modern day Ukraine, which explained why Zelensky was talking about turning Ukraine into a new Israel, for all the Ashkenazi Jews to return there. But Bibi Netanyahu, who has more political lives than a cat, has found one way or another to manipulate situations. There's so much going on there. And of course, in the United States, we have a mass exodus of soldiers from the U.S. military because they're worried they're going to be sent to Israel. Who wants to fight and die for Israel? Musk has said federal workers must report weekly accomplishment or face termination. A lot of them are taking early retirement. 21 have resigned for Musk Dodge by refusing to dismantle critical public services. I suspect these were people who believed in the Democrat agenda and that this is a political stunt. Musk isn't dismantling critical public services. We have a judge blocking agencies from disclosing personal record to Trump's advisor in Dodge. I think that will fall by the way. We have Michael Schellenberger dropping another bombshell that FBI employees are destroying evidence about all of the above. We have Democrats facing extinction as major donors continue to deny them support, where the cost of the Biden illegal agenda could exceed $451 billion. I mean, that's just staggering. Let me mention, by the way, one more point in relation to these files. Actually, the little black book of billionaire Jeffrey Epstein is available. This is a point Brian Dennison makes with Kevin. It is correct that we already had the little black book revealing who's on the client list. So Pam Bondi can actually block that information from coming out. Let me find it here again, where the link I pulled isn't working. All the stuff they have on the 9/11 is just frankly ridiculous. They ought to know much, much better. Here it is. There you go. Here is pedophile billionaire Jeffrey Epstein's little black book. The Holy Grail. Donald Trump, Courtney Love, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, Uber lawyer Alan Dershowitz may have been identified by a butler as potential material witnesses to pedophile billionaire Jeffrey Epstein's crimes against young girls, according to a copy of Epstein's little black book obtained by Gawker. An annotated copy of the address book, which also contains entries for Alex Baldwin, Ralph Fiennes, Griffin Dunn, New York Post gossip Richard Johnson, Ted Kennedy, David Koch, filmmaker Andrew Jaruxte, and all manner of other people you might expect a billionaire to know, turned up in court proceedings after Epstein former House manager Adolfo Rodriguez tried to sell it in 2009. About 50 of the entries, including those of many of Epstein's suspected victims and accomplices, as well as Trump, Love, Barak, Dershowitz, and others, were circled by Rodriguez. The existence of the book, by the way, had been previously reported by the Daily Mail. Gawker is publishing it in full here for the first time. Well, we have redacted addresses, phone numbers, email address, and the last names of individuals who may have been underage victims. This is very impressive. And that came out quite a while ago. This is dated January 23rd, 2015. So we've actually known for quite a while. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So that's an update of the latest news here, some of the big picture. It's, in my opinion, a litmus test of the authenticity of the Trump administration to reveal the records of JFK, 9/11, and Epstein. And after making all the promises and to do about it, if Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, has dedicated herself to transparency, and Donald Trump, the president, who in essence has said he'd never lie to us, do not follow through, then many of us who have been such strong supporters with reservations about Gaza, Israel, and Zionism, of course, are going to have our faith severely shaken. All these records have to have been released, every single one of them, warts and all. Come what may, let the chips fall. And I'm saying emphatically, if that does not happen, we're going to have second thoughts about who is this man we have been supporting and this attorney general who has looked so good from the start, falling short of carrying through on promises they made to the American people. That's the latest.
Thank you so much, Jim. That's great info, great updates. You know, we all hope that everything is gonna, you know, end well. We can ask Trump that, you know, hopefully he does the right thing. You know, we'll see how it goes, but he needs to bring back the gold dollar. You know, all the massive money printing, the massive inflation, all the crazy stuff. He needs to release all the documents, like you said. So, thank you very much, and you know, we'll just keep on tackling out. And everybody, thank you for tuning in. We'll see how it is.
You got it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. Till next time.